There's a type of man in Chicago who doesn't buy houses. They buy people. Roman Vale was one of them. Cold, ruthless, untouchable. When he took over a bankrupt underground gambling club, the assets that came with it weren't just tables, chairs, and cash. There was a woman hidden on the asset list, like an object. Her name was Selena Hart, and Roman Vale bought her like one buys a tool for revenge. But that night, when he saw the scars on her wrists, everything he thought he knew about himself began to crumble. Press like and comment the name of the city you're watching so I know how far this story has progressed. And don't turn off the video, because the worst is yet to come. The city moved at night the way living things moved when they thought no one was watching. Hungry, restless, without apology. Roman Vale stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 43rd floor penthouse and watched the elevated train cut its orange scar through the dark 4 blocks east. The glass was cold against his fingertips. Outside, wind pushed hard off the lake and rattled the panes in their frames. And below, Chicago went on being Chicago. Loud and indifferent and beautiful in the particular way that cities are beautiful when they've given up pretending to be anything other than ruthless. He was 31 years old, and he had not slept more than 4 consecutive hours in 6 years. He turned away from the window. The room behind him was the kind of expensive that didn't need to announce itself. Dark wood, low light, furniture chosen by someone who understood that restraint was its own form of power. His jacket was draped over the back of a chair. His phone sat face down on the desk. On the screen, 3 unread messages from Frank Moretti, his father's oldest advisor and the one man in the organization whose counsel Roman actually took seriously, even when he didn't want to. He didn't flip the phone over. Instead, he poured 2 fingers of bourbon, didn't drink it, and thought about the woman on the 41st floor. Her name was Selena Hart. He'd had her moved in 6 days ago, after the acquisition closed on the Meridian Club, a burned-out underground gambling operation on the near west side that owed money to 4 different criminal organizations and had been running on borrowed time and borrowed muscle for the better part of 2 years. Roman had purchased it not for the property, not for the remaining debts it could collect, but because the club's previous owner, a man named Vincent Trask, had once handed federal investigators a list of names during a quiet cooperation agreement in 2019. One of those names had belonged to Roman's father. The information hadn't been actionable at the time, but it had planted a seed that eventually contributed to a surveillance operation that cost Roman's father his life 18 months later. Vincent Trask had died of a stroke the previous spring, which Roman considered an insult. He had wanted to be the one to finish that particular conversation. Instead, he'd purchased what Trask left behind. Selena Hart had appeared in the transfer paperwork under a section labeled Contracted Entertainment Staff, which was the kind of language that told Roman everything he needed to know about what kind of establishment the Meridian Club had actually been. His lawyer had flagged the entry. Roman had told him to note it and say nothing further. His original thinking had been simple, transactional, cold. Selena had been photographed at several of Trask's private events between 2020 and 2022. Roman assumed she had been there voluntarily, assumed she was the kind of woman who moved in those circles deliberately, who traded proximity to powerful men for protection and comfort and information. He assumed she knew things. He assumed she had known Trask well enough to be complicit. He intended to keep her close until he understood exactly what she knew and what use he could make of it. He had installed her in one of the building's residential floors with a wardrobe, a kitchen, and 2 guards posted outside the main door. She was not a prisoner in the technical sense. No restraints, no cage, no explicit threats. But the guards were there. The elevator required a key card she didn't have. And when she'd asked on the second day whether she could leave, the guard had looked at her without expression and said, "Mr. Vale will let you know when that's appropriate." Roman hadn't visited her directly in those first 6 days. He had instead watched the surveillance feed from her floor. What he had observed disturbed him in a way he was not yet willing to examine closely. She barely ate. The kitchen had been stocked. Good food, real food, nothing institutional. And the plates came back to the service cart largely untouched. She slept during daylight hours and moved around the apartment at 2 and 3 in the morning, always with every light turned on, checking the locks on the windows she couldn't open, standing in the bathroom with the door locked for 30 or 40 minutes at a stretch. She sat on the floor sometimes, back against the couch, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around herself, completely still. She didn't cry. That was the part that bothered him most. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She didn't plead with the guards or try to negotiate. She simply existed inside the apartment the way something exists when it has learned that existing quietly is the safest strategy available. Roman poured the bourbon down the drain and went to bed. He didn't sleep. The storm arrived around midnight on the 7th day. It came in hard from the northwest, the kind of late-season storm that reminded Chicago it didn't owe anyone anything. Sudden pressure drop, temperature plunging 15 degrees in under an hour, lightning strobing above the skyline in colors that had no names. Rain hit the glass in horizontal sheets. The building groaned at its joints. The penthouse lights flickered twice. Roman was still awake when his phone buzzed. Not Moretti this time. One of his security managers on the residential floors below. "Sir." The woman on 41. She's not responding to check-in. Doors still locked from her side. He was already moving. He took the private elevator down 2 floors, keyed through the service corridor, and knocked once on the apartment door. Nothing. He used the override and stepped inside. The lights were all on. All of them. Overhead fixtures, lamps, under-cabinet kitchen lighting. The television was playing with the volume muted, casting blue movement over the walls. He swept the front rooms in 3 seconds, clear, and found her in the bedroom. She was sitting on the far side of the bed, between the mattress and the window, knees pulled to her chest, face turned toward the glass. Lightning pulsed outside. In its light, he could see her lips moving slightly, counting, maybe, or praying. He didn't know. She hadn't heard him come in. "Heart," he said. She flinched so hard she knocked the back of her head against the windowsill. She was on her feet in the same instant, pressing herself flat against the wall, both hands up near her face. Her eyes were wide and completely empty of recognition for 3 full seconds before whatever mechanism allowed her to function in the world clicked back on, and she registered who was standing in her bedroom doorway. She lowered her hands, slowly. "I didn't hear you come in," she said. Her voice was flat and careful and told him nothing. "I knocked." "I didn't hear it." Roman stepped into the room, not close. He stopped near the foot of the bed and looked at her. Really looked, the way he had avoided looking on the surveillance feed because looking directly required him to form conclusions he wasn't ready to form. She was wearing a gray long-sleeve shirt and dark pants. Her feet were bare. Her hair was loose around her face. She looked like someone who had been awake for 3 days running on nothing but stubbornness and fear, which he suspected was not far from the truth. "You're not eating," he said. "I eat." The plates say otherwise. Something moved through her eyes. Not surprise. More like the small recalibration of a person who has just been reminded that their movements are observed. She adjusted her weight, pressed her shoulder blades more firmly against the wall. "I eat enough," she said. Roman moved to the window beside her, not beside her, but adjacent, 6 feet of space between them, and looked out at the storm. Lightning again, and for a moment the lake was visible far to the east, hammered flat by rain. "Were you counting?" he asked. A pause. "What?" "When I came in. Your lips were moving." She looked at him steadily. "Does it matter?" "I'm trying to understand what's going on in my own building." "Then read the lease," she said, and it had a dry edge to it, almost bleak humor, which surprised him. "Oh wait, I don't have one." He turned his head and looked at her. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't classify, not hostility, not submission, something in between, or something outside of both. She had dark circles like bruises under her eyes. Her hands, he noticed, were loose at her sides now. Her right hand was slightly turned, the inner wrist angled away from view. He looked at her wrist. She noticed him looking. She pulled her sleeve down, one quick, practiced motion, automatic as breathing. Roman said nothing. The storm battered the glass between them. After a moment, she said, "What do you want from me?" "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing. I'm not asking because you look tired." He moved to the chair near the small writing desk and sat himself, partly to make the point that sitting was not the same as submission, partly because standing over her felt, suddenly, like something he didn't want to do. "Sit down because I'm going to talk to you, and it's easier to do that if we're at the same level." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, back straight, feet flat on the floor, hands folded in her lap over the sleeve she'd pulled down. "You knew Vincent Trask," Roman said. "Yes. Personally." Something crossed her face. "Define personally." "He listed you in his asset transfer as staff." "I know what he listed me as." Her voice didn't change. That was what unnerved him. The complete absence of modulation. The way she delivered those words the same way she might report weather. "I know exactly how Trask listed me and what category he put me in and what that was worth. I've known for a long time." "Were you there willingly?" Selena looked at the floor between her feet for a moment. Then she looked back up at him. "That's a very simple question for a very complicated situation." "It's a yes or no question." "No," she said. "It isn't." She paused. "But the short answer is no. I was not there willingly." The room was very quiet except for the storm. Roman sat with that for a moment. The bourbon he'd poured earlier sat unfinished somewhere upstairs, and he felt the absence of something to do with his hands. He laced his fingers together and kept his expression still. "How long?" he asked. She looked at him. "How long were you there?" he said. Her jaw moved once. 4 years, roughly." He said nothing. "I got out in 2022, she said. "And then Trask's operation started falling apart, and I thought—" She stopped. Started again, differently. "I thought distance was enough. I thought being invisible was enough. I was in the building the night your people came to take over the club because I'd gone back to get something I'd left behind. I was supposed to be in and out in 20 minutes. I stayed too long." She looked at him without expression. "And then your man put my name on a clipboard." Roman thought about the guard who had processed that transfer. He thought about the clipboard. He thought about the category. Contracted entertainment staff. He thought about himself, 6 floors up, watching the surveillance feed with cold professional detachment, calculating what use he could make of her. "You have nothing to do with what Trask told the investigators in 2019, he said. It wasn't a question exactly. "I was a teenager in Indiana in 2019, she said. "I'd never heard of Vincent Trask." Roman stood up. He walked to the door without speaking and stood there for a moment with his back to her, one hand on the frame, looking at the lit-up hallway beyond. "I'll have someone bring you dinner," he said. "Real food. Tell them what you want." "I don't want your food." "I know." He turned slightly, not fully facing her. "Tell them anyway." He left. In the elevator going back up, he stood without moving and felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. He called Moretti at 12:40 in the morning. Moretti answered on the second ring, which told Roman he hadn't been sleeping either. "I need you to pull everything on Selena Hart," Roman said. "And I mean everything. Not just what she had access to, her whole history, where she came from, what happened to her." He paused. "Specifically in connection with the Trask organization and whatever it was connected to." Moretti was quiet for a moment. "Roman, I know what time it is." "I wasn't going to mention the time." Another pause. "I was going to ask if you're sure you want to know." Roman looked at his reflection in the dark elevator glass. At the face of the man his father's empire had built. "I'm sure," he said. He wasn't. He was back in his penthouse by 1. He stood at the window again, bourbon untouched on the desk behind him, and watched the storm run itself into the lake, and thought about 4 years and a clipboard and a category on a transfer document, and the way she'd pulled her sleeve down in one practiced motion like she'd done it 10,000 times before in front of 10,000 different men who were looking somewhere they shouldn't. He thought about the scars he'd only glimpsed for half a second. He thought about what kind of night, what kind of depth produced marks like that. He stood there until the storm eased and the first gray light started eating the dark off the horizon, and Chicago resumed its noise below, oblivious and relentless. And Roman Vale, the man his city called the architect, felt the specific nausea of a person who has just realized that the blueprint he's been working from was wrong from the very first line. The report came 3 days later. Moretti delivered it in person, which was unusual. He was 71 years old, Italian-American, with the kind of face that had been through enough that it didn't bother performing emotions anymore. He sat across from Roman at the desk in the study and set down a manila folder and placed one hand flat on top of it and looked at Roman directly before he said anything. You're not going to like this, Moretti said. I rarely like anything you bring me. This is different. He didn't move his hand from the folder. The woman, her name before she was moved, before Trask's people processed her into the system, was Selena Marie Harton. She was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Her mother died when she was 11. Her stepfather, a man named Gerald Harton, had associations with a logistics company in Indianapolis that served as a front for a trafficking and exploitation network operating through the Midwest. He sold access to her when she was 16. Moretti stopped. Let that sit. The network Harton was connected to operated through casinos, private clubs, and what they called charity foundations, fundraising events, art exhibitions, the kind of things that put wealthy men in the same room as vulnerable people with no public accountability for what happened behind closed doors. Roman was very still. The network had a silent partnership with your father's organization, Moretti said, between 2014 and 2018, before the fracture. He finally moved his hand from the folder, just slightly. Your father's people ran logistics for them on 3 occasions. Transport, primarily. The financial records exist. I found them in the old accounts because I know where your father hid things. He looked at Roman steadily. Roman, the organization that processed Selena Hart when she was 16, what? We touched it. Not you. Not directly. But we touched it. The room was silent. Roman's hands were flat on the desk in front of him, perfectly still, the way things are still right before they stop being still. Who ran her case? He said. His voice was very quiet. Within that network, who held her specifically? Moretti opened the folder, turned 1 page. A man named Damian Knox, mid-level operator in 2015, significant figure by 2018. He disappeared from known records in 2021 after a federal investigation in Cincinnati collapsed due to witness tampering. His current whereabouts are... Moretti paused. Unknown. Unknown, Roman repeated. As of the last information I could verify, yes. Roman stood up from the desk and walked to the window and stood there. He did not speak for a very long time. She survived 4 years inside that network, Roman said finally. She got out, and then she walked back into a building to retrieve something she'd left behind, and my man put her name on a clipboard as a transferable asset. He turned from the window. His face was completely controlled, which Moretti had learned over many years was significantly more frightening than any display of anger. I brought her here as leverage. I know. I was going to use her to understand what Trask gave the investigators. I know that too. And while I was calculating what use to make of her, he stopped. Exhaled once, very slowly. What does she know about Knox? Does she know where he is? Unknown. She may have information she doesn't know she has. Names, accounts, routes, the kind of operational detail a person absorbs over years without realizing what they're carrying. She's not leverage, Roman said. Moretti said nothing. She's a witness. She's a liability. Not mine, but she exists as one. If Knox is still operating and he learns she's alive and that she's been moved into my building, Roman's jaw tightened. He'll come looking. Yes, Moretti said quietly. He will. The silence stretched between them, and outside, Chicago moved on its axis the way it always did, indifferent to whatever was being decided in quiet rooms above it. Roman stood at the window for another long moment. Then he turned back to the desk and looked at the folder and at Moretti's careful, watchful face. She doesn't know any of this, Roman said. What we found. No. She doesn't know what my father's organization touched. No. She doesn't know that the man who held her is still out there. Moretti was quiet for a moment. Not from us, she doesn't. Roman picked up the folder, looked at the first page, set it back down. He thought about the woman 2 floors below him who slept with every light on and counted things in the dark and pulled her sleeve down in a single practiced motion and had told him, with total flatness, not willingly. He thought about what he was about to do. He thought about what he had already done. Increase security on this building without drawing attention, he said, quietly. I want eyes on every entrance, and I want Knox found. Locate him. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what favors it requires. Find him and tell me where he is and then do nothing until I decide what to do next." Moretti nodded once. "And the woman?" Roman was quiet for a moment. "She stays," he said, "but the guards come off her door." He paused. "And someone get her a key card for the elevator." Moretti looked at him. "She's been locked in long enough," Roman said. He sat back down at the desk after Moretti left and opened the folder and read every page, every name, every date, every notation in careful bureaucratic language that described what 4 years of Selena Hart's life had looked like inside Damian Knox's operation. And when he finished reading, he closed the folder and sat very still for a long time, and felt the specific weight of a man who has spent years building a machine and only just understood, in one cold and comprehensive moment, what his machine had been connected to all along. Somewhere below him, Selena Hart was probably awake. Lights on. Counting. And Roman Vale, who had not felt fear unrelated to tactical threats in a very long time, sat in his father's empire and felt it now. Quiet, corrosive, settling into the base of his throat like smoke from a fire that had been burning much longer than he knew. The keycard arrived at her door the following morning. No note, no explanation, just the small plastic rectangle on the kitchen counter when she woke. Selena looked at it for a long time before she picked it up. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. Selena used the key card on the 3rd day, not immediately. That would have been too easy, too reflexive. The kind of gratitude that looked like relief but was really just another form of compliance. And she had spent enough years performing compliance that she could recognize it in herself the way you recognize a bad habit, by the specific flavor of shame it left behind. She left the card on the counter and looked at it like it was a test she hadn't studied for. On the 1st day, she didn't touch it. On the 2nd day, she moved it to the windowsill. On the 3rd morning, she woke up at 4 a.m. with every light burning and the city glowing orange through the glass, and picked it up and held it until the plastic was warm in her palm. Then she got dressed and took the elevator to the lobby. The guard at the front desk looked up when the doors opened. She saw his hand move toward the desk phone, then stop. Then he looked at her with an expression of careful neutrality and said nothing. She walked to the front door, pressed her palm flat against the glass. Outside, Michigan Avenue at 4 in the morning had the specific quality of a city between states. Not asleep, not awake, just cycling through itself in the dark. A cab moved south through amber light. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Cold air leaked around the door seal and touched her face. She stood there for a full minute. Then she turned around and went back upstairs. Not because she was afraid to leave. She told herself that. She repeated it carefully as the elevator doors closed. She turned the key card over in her hand and thought, I could have left. I chose not to. Those are different things. She wasn't entirely sure she believed it, but she was still working on that. Roman found out through the overnight security log, which he reviewed every morning over coffee he rarely finished. He read the entry. Hart, C, lobby level, 417. Duration, 1 minute 43 seconds. Returned to floor 41 unassisted, and sat with it for a moment. Then he put the log down and looked at the window and thought about a woman standing at a glass door in the middle of the night and choosing, for reasons he couldn't fully see, to come back. He poured the coffee down the drain. He went to see her that afternoon. She answered the door after one knock, which told him she'd heard him in the hall. She was dressed, dark jeans, a loose-cut shirt with the sleeves pulled to her wrists. And her expression did the thing it always did, that careful resetting to neutral, like a face that had learned to be a controlled surface. She stepped back from the door without inviting him in and without asking why he was there, which he was beginning to understand was her particular form of composure. He came inside, stood near the kitchen island. She stayed on the far side of the room near the window, which she did every time he'd noticed, put furniture or space between them as a matter of automatic habit. You went to the lobby last night, he said. I know. You didn't leave. I know that too. I'm not asking why, he said. I'm telling you that you could, if you wanted. She looked at him with something behind her eyes that he couldn't read. Could I? Yes. And then what? She crossed her arms, not tight, just settled, a self-contained posture. I go back to wherever I was, which wasn't anywhere, and whoever's been looking for me finds me 3 days later without a building full of armed men between us. She let that land flat. Is that what you're offering? Roman said nothing. I'm not stupid, Selena said. I've been not stupid for long enough to know the difference between a door that's open and a door that's safe to walk through. She looked at him steadily. So don't tell me I could leave unless you're actually prepared to tell me what happens after. I don't know what happens after, he said. That's honest. Yes, she said. It is. Something shifted slightly in her face, not warmth, more like the recognition of an unexpected quality in a person you'd been braced to distrust completely. Which is more than I usually get. Roman moved to the table and sat down, mostly because standing in a room where she was keeping maximum distance was beginning to feel like a conversation conducted through bulletproof glass. She watched him sit. After a moment, like a decision she made privately and acted on before she could reconsider, she came to the table and sat across from him. Knox, Roman said. The name hit her like a change in air pressure. She didn't flinch. Her body didn't move at all. But something behind her eyes recalibrated instantly, and when she looked at him again, she was looking at him differently, the way you look at something when you've suddenly had to update your entire understanding of what it is. You found him, she said. We found that he exists. Current location is unknown. He watched her face. Did you think we wouldn't? I thought it would take longer. She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were on the table, both of them flat, and he could see that she was very consciously keeping them still. How much do you know? Enough. He paused. I know what the operation was. I know what your role in it was. I know it wasn't voluntary. He kept his voice even and factual because he had the sense that anything resembling pity would close the conversation immediately. I know Knox ran your case specifically. Selena looked at the table surface between her hands. Then you know he doesn't leave witnesses, she said. I know that's his pattern. I'm not a witness in any legal sense. I never testified. I never gave names. She looked up. But I remember everything. Names, accounts, the shell companies they ran the money through, the politicians who came to events, She stopped. Her jaw moved once. I remember everything because when you spend years inside something like that, memory is the only thing that belongs to you. It's the only thing they can't take. She paused. Knox knows that. He knew it then. And if he knows I'm alive and I'm here, he'll move, Roman said. He's probably already moving. The room was quiet. Roman looked at her face, really looked, the way he'd been avoiding since the lobby report, since reading the file, since the night in the storm when she'd pulled her sleeve down in that one automatic motion. She looked exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't touch. The way people look when they've been running from something for so long that the running has become the baseline condition and rest feels like a threat. How long have you been looking over your shoulder, he said. Since I was 16. No drama in it, just fact. Roman said, then we have to find him first. We, she said. Yes. She studied him. Why? It was a reasonable question. He understood why she was asking it. He thought about several answers and discarded them. The tactical ones, the strategic ones, the ones that framed this as an organizational decision, because all of them were partially true and none of them were complete, and she had just acknowledged that she could tell the difference between honesty and performance. Because I read the file, he said, and because the network Knox was part of. My father's organization had contact with it, financially, logistically. He said it plainly. Which means the money that built this building, that bought the Meridian Club, that paid for the key card in your apartment, some of it came through a machine that put you where you were. He let that sit. I didn't know that when I had you moved here. I thought you were leverage. I was wrong. And I don't... He paused. I don't leave debts unpaid. Selena stared at him. That's a very organized crime way to say you feel guilty, she said. Yes, he said. It is. Something happened in her face. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one. Like a reflex she'd mostly trained out of herself but hadn't fully eliminated. It vanished quickly. But he'd seen it. I have information, she said. Operational specifics, things that would take investigators years to reconstruct through standard channels. Names of people who are still working, still protected, still moving money through the same structures because they assumed the network was buried. She looked at him steadily. I've been carrying it for 4 years because I had nowhere to take it, and no one who was both capable of acting on it and not part of the problem themselves. Give it to me, Roman said. Why would I do that? Because I have resources Knox doesn't know I have yet, and because the alternative is waiting for him to find you first, which, based on the pattern in that file, you have somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks. Selina was quiet for a long time. She looked at him, the table, the window, the hands she still had pressed flat against the wood. Then she said, If I give you what I know and you use it to destroy Knox, what do you get out of it? Closure, he said. That's not a business answer. No, he said, it isn't. She looked at him once more and nodded once, small and precise. Then we start tomorrow, she said, and I need paper. The meeting with Moretti went poorly, which Roman had expected. It went poorly the way a controlled structure begins to show fractures. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the specific incremental way that tells an observer who knows what to look for that the underlying load is changing. Moretti arrived at the penthouse at 7 in the evening with 2 other men, Danny Chu, Roman's financial operations director, and a man named Petra Voss, who ran intelligence gathering for the organization's security division. They had all seen the updated file. They had all drawn conclusions. We pull back, Moretti said, before Roman had finished pouring water for the table. The Knox angle is a federal exposure waiting to happen. If we start moving against his network, we alert the same investigators who are already circling the Vail financial holdings from the Trask fallout. We're already exposed, Roman said. We're adjacent. There's a difference. Moretti leaned forward. The woman has information that could burn this organization to the waterline if it ends up in the wrong hands. She's not an asset, Roman. She's a grenade. She's a person, Roman said, and the flatness in his voice was the kind that made all 3 of them go still. A brief silence. Moretti said, carefully, I understand that. I know what you're talking about. Roman looked at each of them in turn, not a slow theatrical pan, just a quick, complete assessment. The question you're actually asking is whether I've lost perspective on this because of what we found in the file. And the answer is no. The question I'm actually answering is whether we sit and wait for Knox to come to us, which he will, or whether we control the timing. He looked at Moretti. Which one of those sounds like something my father would have done? Moretti closed his mouth. Danny Chu said quietly, The father answer is wait, consolidate position, let the threat come to you on known ground. The father answer, Roman said, is also why his empire had connections to a trafficking network we didn't know about for 15 years. He let that land. I'm not my father. You sound like him right now, Moretti said. The room went flat and cold. Roman sat with that for a moment, and the moment was uncomfortable for everyone at the table. Then he said, I sound like him when I'm making organizational decisions. That's his training, that's his structure in my head, I know that. He paused. But I'm not going to use his logic on this situation, because his logic is part of how we ended up here. Moretti looked at him for a long time. Then he sat back and rubbed his hand over his face. You're going to do this regardless of what I say. I'm going to do this with or without your help. I prefer your help. Because you're going to need it, Moretti said, not warmly. This isn't just Knox. If you start pulling threads from his operation, you're going to pull names that are tied to city government, to federal law enforcement contacts, to people who have been protecting themselves with those connections for years. This isn't a surgical operation. It's pulling a loose thread on a sweater and not stopping until there's nothing left. I know, Roman said. That sweater is partly yours. I know that too. Moretti looked at him with something complicated in his face, frustration and something older, something that looked almost like grief. He had known Roman since he was 7 years old. He had helped build the empire that Roman now sat at the center of. And Roman could see him doing the specific math that people do when they've invested their life in something and begin to see it changing into something they didn't plan for. Fine, Moretti said. He said it the way people say fine when they mean I disagree, but I'm choosing to continue, which was a form of loyalty Roman recognized and did not take lightly. Then we do it clean. We do it controlled. And the woman stays in this building and talks to no one she hasn't already talked to. Agreed, Roman said. And Roman. Moretti met his eyes. If this goes wrong, if Knox gets to her before we find him, if the investigators use this to blow open the Vale financials, if the whole thing comes apart, I need you to be clear that you understand what you're risking. Roman thought about the lobby log at 4 a.m, about a woman standing at a glass door with her palm pressed against it. I understand, he said. Moretti left with Danny Chu and Petra Voss, and Roman stood at the window for a long time after, watching the city's lights blur against the glass, and thought about what it meant to be clear that you understood a risk versus what it meant to have fully accepted it. They were not the same thing. He was still working on the second one. Selena filled 14 pages over the following 4 days. Not organized, not indexed. She didn't produce it like testimony, didn't arrange it chronologically or categorically. She wrote it the way it came, which was in fragments and associative jumps and half-finished images that she'd push away and come back to, sitting at the kitchen table in the apartment with the city below and the lake in the distance. She wrote Knox's name and stopped. She wrote a phone number she'd seen on a wall once, in a house in Cincinnati, that she'd memorized without consciously intending to. She wrote the name of a company, and then the name of the man who'd run it, and then the license plate number of the car he drove, read it backward because that's how she'd taught herself to look at things she wasn't supposed to see. Roman sat with her on the third day and asked questions, careful ones, not pushy, not interrogation, the kind of questions that were really just invitations to continue. She watched him during those sessions with the wariness of someone who had learned that attention was a currency with a high hidden cost. But she kept answering, partly because the information had been trapped in her for 4 years like pressure behind a seal, and talking about it, even to him, even like this, was a specific kind of relief that was almost physical, partly because she had looked at him when he said, I know what you're talking about, and had seen something in his face that she hadn't seen in the faces of most men who had paid any kind of attention to her. She saw someone who was actually listening. She wasn't naive about what that meant. She knew the difference between a man who listened because he wanted something and a man who listened because he could hear you. Most men in her experience had been the former. She wasn't certain Roman Vale was the latter. But she wasn't certain he wasn't, and that uncertainty was new enough to be worth sitting with. On the 4th day, she handed him the pages. He read them at his desk while she sat on the couch in the apartment 1 floor down and held a cup of tea she didn't drink, and watched the sky change color outside the window. And she told herself she didn't care what he found there, which was the same thing as caring very much. He called her at 9 p.m. She answered on the second ring. Knox is running money through 4 shell companies we can trace, he said, without preamble, without warm-up. 3 of them are tied to a construction firm in Indianapolis that has contracts with federal infrastructure projects. One of them feeds into a private equity group that is currently under separate SEC review. A brief pause. You wrote a name, Alderman Marcus Crane. Yes, she said. He's on the city's Public Safety Oversight Board. I know. He attended 3 events. You were at 2 of them. Yes. A silence. I'm going to need you to understand something, Roman said. When we use this information, when we start moving on these names, it will put you in direct danger, not general danger. Knox will know someone has his operational details. There are only a small number of people who could have that information. He'll know it's you. Another pause, shorter. He may already suspect you're the reason I bought the Meridian Club. He knows I'm alive, Selena said. It wasn't a question. We have to assume. She was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, Chicago glittered and moved and produced its low, constant noise. She sat with the cup of cold tea and the weight of 14 pages of her own memory and thought about a man named Knox, whose face she could still see in the dark with perfect clarity. Then we move faster, she said. Yes, Roman said. She almost said something else. She almost said something about the fact that she wasn't used to moving toward the thing that frightened her instead of away from it, that this was new, that she was doing it badly and was aware of doing it badly, and was doing it anyway. She almost said several things. Instead, she said, Roman. Yeah. The number I wrote on page 11. The one with the 317 area code. Don't call it from any phone connected to this building. I wasn't going to. I know you weren't. I'm saying it out loud so I know I said it. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Okay, she said, and hung up. The message arrived on a Thursday. It appeared on the wall of Roman's nightclub on the near north side sometime between the 2 a.m. closing and the 4 a.m. cleaning shift. Written in paint that was not paint, in letters that were 18 inches high across the white brick wall of the service corridor that only staff used. 3 words, she belongs to us. The cleaning crew called the manager. The manager called Roman's security line. Roman's security line called Moretti. Moretti called Roman at 4:43 in the morning. Roman was already awake. He looked at the photograph on his phone, the service corridor, the white wall, the 3 words in dark red, and felt something that he had not allowed himself to feel in a professional context for 6 years. Not anger. Anger he knew how to use. This was older and colder, the thing underneath anger, the thing that anger was built on top of to make it manageable. Fear. Not for himself. That was the part that confused him briefly before it didn't confuse him anymore. He was afraid for the woman on the 41st floor who was probably awake right now, lights on, sitting somewhere with her back to the wall, unaware that Knox had just announced himself on Roman's property. He called building security. Double the detail on floor 41, he said. Do it now, do it quietly, and if anyone asks, say it's a building-wide security review. He paused. No one goes in or out of that floor without direct authorization from me or Moretti. Then he stood at his window in the dark and looked at Chicago and understood, in the specific and visceral way that makes abstract threats into real ones, that Damian Knox was no longer a name in a file. He was a countdown. And he had just told Roman exactly how close the clock was to 0. He was still standing there when his phone buzzed again. Not Moretti this time. Not security. A number he didn't recognize, a 317 area code, sending a single image file. Roman opened it. It was a photograph of his lobby, taken from outside, through the front glass doors, the angle slightly elevated, shot from across the street or from a vehicle. Timestamp in the lower corner, 3:58 a.m. 14 minutes after the message had been discovered on the club wall. In the photograph, barely visible through the glass, a woman stood at the lobby doors with her palm pressed against them, looking out at the street. Selena. Her back was to the camera, so she hadn't seen it, but whoever had taken the photograph had been standing on the street with a direct line of sight to her for at least the minute and 43 seconds that the security log had recorded her standing there 3 days ago, which meant Knox hadn't started watching this building tonight. He'd been watching it for days. Roman set the phone face down on the desk with a precision that was the opposite of calm, the careful movement of a man who understood that if he didn't place it gently, he would put it through the glass surface. He stood there with both hands flat on the desk and breathed once, slow and controlled, through his nose. Then he picked the phone back up and called Moretti. "The photograph I just sent you," Roman said when Moretti answered on the first ring. "Look at the timestamp. Look at the angle." A pause. The sound of Moretti opening the image. A longer pause. "How long?" Moretti said. "At minimum 3 days, probably longer." Roman moved to the window. He was watching her at the door before we even knew he was in Chicago, before the message on the club wall. The wall was a signal. He wanted us to know he'd already been here. "That's not a threat," Moretti said quietly. "That's a demonstration." "Yes." "He's telling us the security perimeter is already compromised, or that he wants us to think it is." Roman looked down at the street 43 floors below. The early morning emptiness, the sodium orange light, the handful of cars that could belong to anyone. "Double the external surveillance. Pull the feeds from every camera within 2 blocks of this building going back 5 days. And get Petra on the phone. I want a full sweep of everyone who entered this building in the last week. Staff, contractors, visitors, everyone. That's a 2-day job minimum." "Then start now." Roman paused. "And Frank." "Nobody tells the woman about the photograph, not yet." A beat. Roman, not yet, he said. I need 24 hours to understand the scope before I put that in front of her. Moretti said nothing for a moment, and the nothing was the specific kind that communicated disagreement without stating it. Then he said, 24 hours, and hung up. Roman looked at the street a moment longer. Then he went to get dressed, because sleep was no longer a consideration, and standing at a window in the dark doing nothing was not something he was built for. He was at the desk by 6 a.m. with the surveillance package Petra Voss began sending through at 1:15. Floor by floor, entrance by entrance. Front lobby, service entrance, loading dock, parking structure. He went through it methodically, the way he did everything that mattered, without rushing, without skipping, treating each frame like it might be the one that changed the picture. It was the parking structure footage that stopped him. Third level, northeast corner. A maintenance worker in gray coveralls had entered at 11:40 p.m. on Monday, 4 days prior, carrying a tool case and badged through on what appeared to be a valid contractor credential. He'd spent 22 minutes on the third level and left. Roman watched the man's movement on the footage 3 times. The way he moved, the route he took, the way he positioned himself twice near structural support columns that had direct sightlines to the elevator bank. Roman froze the frame on the man's face as he turned toward the camera briefly. Not deliberately, just a natural movement, the chin coming up as he adjusted the tool case strap on his shoulder. Roman didn't recognize the face, but he recognized the walk. The particular gait, the way the weight shifted slightly left on each step, a legacy of a healed injury below the right knee, the kind of thing that changed the mechanics permanently, even after the pain was gone. He had seen that walk in a photograph in Selena's file. He pulled up the file on his second screen and found the photograph. Grainy, low resolution, surveillance image from 2018 from a federal operation in Cincinnati that had been scrubbed but not entirely destroyed. A younger face, a different posture, but the same leg, the same leftward lean on every step. Roman sat back in his chair. He called Petra. The maintenance worker, third level parking, Monday night, he said. Tell me about the credential he used. He heard Petra's keyboard. Badge number 4471-C, she said. Registered to a HVAC contractor out of Cicero. Cleared through our standard vendor verification process on, a pause, October 9th. Who authorized the October 9th clearance? Another pause. Longer. Danny Chu's office, Petra said. The room went very quiet. Roman sat with that for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, Don't call Danny. Don't contact him at all. I want you to pull every contractor authorization that came through his office in the last 60 days and send it to me directly. Nothing through the shared drive. Direct to this terminal only. He paused. And Petra, this conversation didn't happen. Understood, she said, with the clipped tone of someone who understood completely and wished they didn't. Roman set the phone down. Danny Chu had been with the Vail organization for 9 years. He had come up through the financial operations division, had been promoted 3 times under Roman's father, had been one of 4 people Roman trusted enough to bring into the Selena situation. He had sat at Roman's table 4 days ago and said, quietly, the father answer is wait, consolidate position. He had looked Roman in the eyes and said it. Roman thought about that moment now. The steadiness in Danny's face, the reasonableness of it, the way it had read like loyalty. He pulled up the authorization files Petra sent through 40 minutes later and began reading. His coffee went cold beside him. Outside, Chicago woke up and started making its noise, but it was very far away. By 8:15, he had enough. 11 contractor authorizations over 60 days, 7 of which had come through Danny's office with credentials that traced back through 2 layers of shell company and 1 defunct logistics firm, to a property management group in Indianapolis that Selena had named on page 7 of her 14 pages. The same Indianapolis that appeared 3 times in the operational notes Knox used for his network's Midwest logistics. Danny Chu had not been compromised recently. The authorization trail went back to the year Roman's father died. Danny had been feeding access, slowly, carefully, never enough to be obvious, for 18 months. Roman sat with that for a long time. He sat with it the way you sit with something that restructures the last year and a half of your decisions, All the conversations you had in rooms you thought were secure, all the plans you thought were only known to you. He sat with it until the anger came up. Not fast, not hot, but cold and total, spreading through him the way cold spreads, filling every space. Then he called Frank Moretti. "I need you in my office in 20 minutes, he said. "Come in through the parking structure, not the lobby. Use the service entrance on Erie." A pause. "And Frank, don't tell Danny." The silence on Moretti's end lasted 2 seconds. "How bad?" Moretti said. 18 months, Roman said. He heard Moretti breathe. 20 minutes, Moretti said. He was there in 17. Roman slid the files across the desk without speaking and watched Moretti read. The old man's face was unreadable for the first 2 pages. By the 5th page, something changed around his eyes. Not surprise, exactly. More like the specific grief of a confirmation. The thing you hoped wasn't true, turning out to be true. "You knew something was off," Roman said. "I had a feeling, nothing I could name." Moretti set the pages down. "Danny's been quieter than usual for the last 6 weeks. I thought it was the pressure of the Trask fallout." He looked up. "I should have said something." "You're saying it now." Roman stood and moved to the window. "How much does he know?" "Everything you've shared in the main briefings, the Knox investigation, the shell company traces." Moretti paused. "The woman." "The woman," Roman repeated. "Her name, which floor she's on, that she's providing operational intelligence." Moretti's voice was careful and deliberate. "Roman, if Knox has had a man inside this building since Monday, and if Danny has been his channel since before that, then Knox doesn't just know she's here," Roman said. "He knows what she's given us. He knows how far the investigation has progressed. He knows our security structure." He turned from the window. "And the photograph he sent, that wasn't surveillance. That was a message to us that his information inside this building is real. He was showing us he already knew where she was standing at 4 in the morning. Moretti said nothing. "We have to move her," Roman said. "If we move her, Knox knows we've discovered the breach, which means he accelerates. If we don't move her, she's in a building whose security architecture Knox has had 4 days to map." Roman's voice was controlled and flat. "Option 2 is not an option." "Where do you move her?" Roman thought. He thought about the safe properties, the ones registered under shell entities that Danny's access would cover, which eliminated most of them. He went through the remaining inventory of places that were clean, secure, and unknown to anyone who had passed through his main briefing structure in the last 6 weeks. "The Lake Superior property," he said. "The house in the Upper Peninsula. He'd purchased it 2 years ago under a land trust held by a law firm in Duluth that had no connection to the Vail financial structure. He had never mentioned it in any organizational meeting. It existed in no file Danny Chu had ever touched." Moretti nodded slowly. "Remote, defensible, off the grid," he paused. "Long drive. 7 hours. We go tonight. You're taking her yourself." "Yes." Moretti looked at him. "And Danny?" "Danny stays exactly where he is until she's out of this building and this city." Roman picked up the files from the desk. "Once she's safe, I'll deal with Danny myself." "Roman," Moretti's voice had a warning in it. "Deal with carefully means something very specific in this organization, and I need to know which." "He answers for what he did," Roman said. "How he answers is something I'll decide when I'm not operating on 2 hours of sleep and a betrayal that covers 18 months of conversations I trusted." He held Moretti's gaze. "I'm not my father, which means I don't decide what someone deserves when I'm this angry. I wait until I can see clearly." Moretti was quiet for a moment. Something moved in his face, complicated, old, tired. "Your father would have had him in the river by noon," Moretti said. "I know," Roman said. "That's not a compliment." He went to her apartment at 9 a.m. She was at the kitchen table when he came in, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, the 14 pages spread in front of her with 3 additional pages she'd clearly written since the previous evening. She looked up when he entered and read his face in approximately 2 seconds with the accuracy of someone whose survival had depended for years on reading rooms quickly. "What happened?" she said. I need you to pack what you need for 3 to 5 days. Don't take more than you can carry in one bag. He moved into the kitchen and kept his voice even. We're leaving tonight, after dark. She put the mug down. He's inside the building, she said. Not a question. Roman looked at her. Not physically. Someone on the inside who's been feeding him information. He watched her face process it. We're going somewhere Knox doesn't know about. Off the main property network. You'll be safe. Stop, she said. He stopped. Selena stood up from the table. She moved to the window and stood there with her back to him and her arms crossed. Not defensively, but the way people cross their arms when they're containing something rather than protecting against it. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the specific set of them that she got when she was managing a fear response without letting it manage her. How long has your insider been feeding Knox? She said. 18 months. She turned around. Who? That doesn't matter right now. It matters to me. Her voice was quiet and precise. 18 months. That covers the period when I was still in Indianapolis. That covers the period when Trask's club was still operating. That covers... She stopped. Her eyes moved across nothing visible, the way they did when she was tracing something internally. Did your insider know where I was before you bought the Meridian Club? Roman said nothing. Did Knox use your organization's logistics in 2018? She said, and it wasn't a question anymore. Did your father's people touch his operation directly? Yes, Roman said. I told you that. You told me it was financial and logistical. Transport on 3 occasions. She looked at him steadily. Roman, in 2018 I was moved from Indianapolis to Cincinnati in a private transport arranged through a logistics firm that connected to a construction company in Chicago. Her voice remained completely flat. I never knew who organized that transport. I knew someone did. Someone with resources. She looked at him. Was it your father's people? The room was very quiet. Roman thought about the file. He thought about what Moretti had pulled from the old accounts. Your father's people ran logistics for them on 3 occasions. Transport, primarily. He had read that line and understood it in the abstract organizational sense. A criminal network providing services to another criminal network without full knowledge of the nature of what was being transported. He looked at Selena's face. He thought about what transport meant in Knox's operation. He thought about what had been transported. I don't know, he said. I don't know if that specific transport was one of the 3. But it could have been. He held her gaze. Yes. She nodded once. Slow and small. She turned back to the window. He watched her stand there and process something that he understood. From the way her body held itself, from the way she breathed, was not new information, but rather confirmation of something she had suspected for a long time. The kind of confirmation that doesn't break you because you'd already broken and rebuilt around the shape of it. So the man who bought me, she said quietly to the glass, might be the son of the man who moved me. Roman said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would make that sentence smaller or less true. After a moment, Selena said, Pack tonight. Yes. We leave after dark. Yes. She turned from the window. Her eyes were dry and her face was controlled, and she looked at him with something that he couldn't fully name. Not forgiveness, not accusation, something in between. The look of a person deciding in real time whether to continue investing in something that has just revealed another layer of cost. I'll be ready, she said. He nodded and turned toward the door. Roman, he stopped. The person who's been feeding Knox. She paused. They know about those 14 pages. They know what I gave you. Yes. Then Knox knows I've identified Alderman Crane, and the shell companies, and the 317 number. She said it plainly. He knows his operation is exposed. That changes his timeline. Roman turned back. I know. He won't wait anymore. Her jaw tightened for a moment, then released. He'll come before we can move. That's why we're moving tonight. She held his gaze. And if he comes before tonight? Roman looked at her, at the woman who had survived 4 years in Knox's machine, who had carried 14 pages of memory like ballast, who had stood at a glass door in the middle of the night and come back, who was standing in front of him now calculating threat timelines with the flat precision of someone whose relationship to danger had long since moved past fear into something more durable. "Then I deal with it," he said. "We," she said. He looked at her. "We deal with it," she repeated. He nodded once. The rest of the day moved in two registers simultaneously. On the surface, normal, the building operating as it always did, staff moving through their routines, Danny Chu sending 2 routine emails that Roman read and did not respond to and felt nothing particular about, which told him how thoroughly his anger had gone cold and become something else. Below the surface, Moretti was coordinating the vehicle, the route, the property in the Upper Peninsula. Petra was quietly pulling every security record she could access without tripping the internal alerts that Danny's access level would trigger. Roman spent 3 hours on a secure terminal building what he could build in 3 hours with Selena's 14 pages and his own organization's financial records. A compressed intelligence package, the kind of thing that took federal investigators 18 months to construct, assembled here in an afternoon by a man who knew which doors to open because his father had installed them. He was on the 51st page of the package when his phone buzzed. Danny Chu's extension. Roman looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he answered. "I need to show you something," Danny said. His voice was its usual register. Calm, professional, slightly dry, giving nothing. "The financial trace on the Indianapolis shell companies. I've been running a parallel analysis and I found an inconsistency in the Selena Hart files you should probably see." Roman's hand tightened slightly on the phone. "Send it to the shared drive," Roman said. "I'd rather do this in person. Some of it is sensitive in a way that's hard to frame in writing." A pause. "I can be upstairs in 10 minutes. Roman looked at the window, at the street below, at the city that had been his father's and then became his, and was currently in the process of becoming something he didn't have a name for yet. 15 minutes, Roman said. "My office." He hung up and called Moretti immediately. "Danny just called," he said. "He wants a face-to-face. He knows something shifted. He's checking whether you're on to him. Or Knox is accelerating through him." Roman stood up. "I need you in the building, now, and I need 2 men outside floor 41 who Danny doesn't know." "Already moving," Moretti said. Roman looked at the 51 pages on his screen, at the intelligence package he'd spent the afternoon building, at the name of Alderman Marcus Crane and the 4 shell companies and the 317 number and the construction firm in Indianapolis and Danny Chu's authorization credentials sitting in a separate file like a wound that had been quietly bleeding for 18 months. He saved the package to an encrypted drive. He put the drive in his jacket pocket. Then he went to meet Danny Chu and sat down across from him in the office where they had met dozens of times over 9 years, and looked at the face of a man he had trusted and listened to whatever careful construction Danny had assembled for this conversation with the specific attention of someone who already knows the ending and is deciding how to write the last scene. Danny opened his laptop and turned it toward Roman. On the screen was a financial diagram. Neat, color-coded, the kind of thing Danny produced naturally, the language he thought in. It showed the Indianapolis Shell Company connections, legitimate, accurate, pulled directly from Selena's information. Roman looked at it and felt the cold spread further, because it was accurate, which meant Danny knew exactly what Selena had given them. "This is good work," Roman said carefully. "Thank you." Danny's face was composed. "The problem is the exposure. If we move on these companies directly, the paper trail leads back through 3 of our own holding structures. It's messy." He paused. "I think we need to consider whether pursuing Knox is worth the organizational cost." "You think we should stop?" Roman said. "I think we should be strategic." Danny met his eyes. "The woman's information is useful, but she's also a liability. If Knox makes contact, if he offers a clean resolution that keeps our exposure contained—" "A clean resolution," Roman said. "A separation. She leaves. Knox gets what he's looking for. Our financial exposure on the shell companies stays contained. Nobody loses more than they can afford." Danny's voice was measured and completely reasonable. "It's the organizational answer." Roman looked at him. He looked at him for a long time, at the careful neutral face and the reasonable voice and the 9 years and the laptop with its color-coded diagram, and felt the cold in his chest harden into something that had a specific shape and weight. "She leaves," Roman said. "That's the resolution you're describing. It's a clean outcome." "Danny," Roman's voice was very quiet, "you just told me to hand a woman back to the man who held her for 4 years so that our financial exposure stays contained." Danny's face remained composed. "I'm describing options." "Get out," Roman said. Danny went still. "Get out of my office," Roman said, the same quiet register. "And stay in this building. Don't make calls. Don't send messages. Don't leave the premises." He held Danny's gaze. "Because if you walk out that door and make a single call in the next 6 hours, I will know. And the conversation we have after that will be different from this one." Danny closed the laptop slowly. He looked at Roman with an expression that was finally, after 9 years, completely unreadable. All the careful performance stripped away, leaving something behind it that was neither remorse nor defiance, but something colder than either. He stood up, picked up the laptop, walked to the door. At the door he stopped but didn't turn around. "He's not going to let you move her," Danny said. "He's already in the building." The words landed and Roman was out of the chair before the sentence ended, phone in his hand, dialing floor security, moving for the door. And from somewhere below, 2 floors, maybe 3, came the sound of the building's emergency power cutting out, the specific deep click of a full system interruption, followed by the secondary silence of every electric lock in the structure disengaging simultaneously. And in that silence, Roman understood that Knox had not been planning a surveillance operation, or a pressure campaign, or a negotiated resolution. He had been planning a blackout. Roman hit the stairwell door at a full run, phone against his ear, Moretti not answering, the line ringing into nothing because somewhere below the emergency cutover had killed the cellular repeaters on the interior floors. Knox's people knew the building well enough to know exactly which infrastructure to hit first. The stairwell was gray emergency lighting, the thin red-orange of backup strips along the floor edges, every shadow twice as deep as it should have been. Roman took the stairs 2 at a time down toward 41, his shoulder hitting the landing rail on the turn, the impact jarring up through his arm and meaning nothing. Behind him he heard Danny choose footsteps, not following, moving the other direction, up toward the roof access or the service corridors, and Roman made the calculation in under a second. Danny could wait. Danny was already finished. What mattered was the floor below. He hit the 41st floor door and stopped. He stopped because running through an unknown situation without reading the entry point first was how men died. And whatever else Roman Vale was, he was not a man who died from impatience. He pressed himself flat against the wall beside the door and listened. His breathing was elevated. He brought it down in 3 counts, the old discipline, the thing his father's security trainer had drilled into him at 14. Control your breath, control your hands, control the room, and listened. Silence on the other side. Not natural silence, the compressed silence of a space where people are being deliberately quiet. He pushed through low and fast. The hallway was empty, emergency lighting here too, the same thin strips. Both guards who had been posted outside Selena's apartment door were down, one against the wall with his hands zip-tied, and a cut across his forehead leaking dark in the low light, conscious but dazed, the other face down on the floor, not moving but breathing. Roman clocked the chest rise in his peripheral vision as he moved past. Professionals. They'd been neutralized quickly and quietly, which meant Knox hadn't sent amateurs. Her door was open. Roman went through it fast and low and cleared the front room in 2 seconds, empty, and the kitchen in 1, empty, and was moving toward the bedroom when he heard her voice, not screaming, not pleading, talking. He stopped in the hallway back against the wall and listened. "Already sent it," Selena was saying. Her voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when the person using them is operating on controlled terror, every word placed carefully. The package went to 3 separate recipients 40 minutes ago. Encrypted, time-delayed delivery. If I don't send a cancellation code in the next 6 hours, it goes live to every federal inbox on the list. A man's voice, smooth, unhurried, carrying the particular ease of someone who has spent years being the most dangerous person in any room he entered. That's a very creative story. It's not a story. You've been in this building for 2 weeks, under surveillance, with no unsupervised access to external communications. I had the key card, Selena said. I had the lobby. I had 47 minutes on Monday morning when your man in the parking structure was doing his sweep and your man inside was in a morning briefing and nobody was watching the service entrance on the east side. A beat. I've been counting exits since I was 16. You taught me that. Silence. Roman moved to the bedroom doorway. There were 3 of them. 2 men positioned near the window, both armed, both watching the door, which meant they'd heard him in the hall and had been waiting. The 3rd man stood near the far wall, 6 feet from where Selena sat on the edge of the bed, both hands visible, back straight, looking at Damien Knox with the focused stillness of someone who has decided to stop being afraid of something and is now simply dealing with it. Knox himself was not what the file photographs suggested. The photographs showed a man who looked like the kind of efficient middle management type that institutions produce: medium height, medium build, face designed to be forgotten in a crowd. In person, he was different. In person, he had the quality of a space that has had all the unnecessary things removed from it. No excess weight, no excess movement, no expression that wasn't specifically chosen. He was wearing a gray jacket over dark clothes, and he looked, Roman thought, exactly like what he was. A man who had spent 20 years moving human beings through logistics networks and had optimized himself to match the work. He looked at Roman when Roman appeared in the doorway. "Roman Vale," Knox said. The tone was conversational. "You look like your father." "I've been told that," Roman said. He kept his hands visible and away from his body, not because he was surrendering the room, but because 2 armed men had their weapons up, and the geometry of the situation required him to be still for approximately the next 60 seconds, while he figured out the geometry of the next 60 after that. "It's not meant as a compliment in my family. It's not meant as anything," Knox said. "Just an observation." He looked at Roman with the assessing quality of someone doing rapid arithmetic: threat level, options, cost-benefit. "Your man Chu told me you'd found the breach. I assumed you'd try to move her tonight. I moved the timeline." "Apparently." "The building's communication infrastructure will be restored in about 20 minutes. Your people outside will be inside shortly after. This isn't a long window." Knox glanced at Selena, then back at Roman. "I came to resolve something that should have been resolved 4 years ago." "She's not going anywhere with you," Roman said. "I'm not here to take her somewhere." Knox's voice remained level. "I'm here because she has information that ends careers and lives of people who are considerably more protected than either of you. People who have resources I don't have, and those people have made it very clear that if her information becomes public, the problem they have is with whoever allowed it to become public." He paused. "That used to be a theoretical problem. The package she just described makes it immediate." "So you're not here for her," Roman said. "You're here because someone above you sent you." Something moved in Knox's face. The first real expression, not quite irritation, more like the specific displeasure of a man who is accurate and doesn't like being accurately read. "I'm here to contain a situation." "By doing what?" "By making her understand that the information she has destroys more than it saves. That the people above this network have the capability to make every witness, every recipient, every federal contact on her list disappear before a single case is opened." He looked at Selena. "You're not leverage. You're a liability. And the people I work with don't leave liabilities unresolved." Selena looked at him. "Then why are you still talking?" Knox looked at her for a moment. Roman moved. Not at Knox. At the closer of the 2 armed men, the one on his left whose attention had fractured for 1/2 second toward Selena's voice. Roman covered the 3 feet between them before the man had completed his turn, got inside the weapon's arc, drove his forearm up under the man's chin hard enough to feel teeth click together through the impact, and took the gun as the man's grip broke. He pivoted and put the wall behind him before Knox had fully processed that the geometry had changed. The second armed man had his weapon up and pointed at Selena. Everyone stopped. Roman held the recovered weapon pointed at Knox. Knox stood with his hands loose at his sides, the expression on his face now purely calculating. The second gunman had not moved from his position near the window. "Better," Knox said, and he meant it. An authentic acknowledgement, the way professionals acknowledge each other. Your father was slower. My father wasn't trying to protect anything, Roman said. He was just trying to win. He held Knox's gaze. The package she described. Is it real? He said it without looking at Selena. He said it to Knox because Knox's face would tell him more than Selena's answer. Knox said nothing, which was the answer. It was real. Somehow, in the 47 minutes on Monday morning when every watcher had been elsewhere, she had done exactly what she'd said. The exits she'd been counting for 2 weeks, not just physical exits, but operational ones. And Roman had given her a key card, and she had used it in the specific 4-hour window where it mattered, and hadn't told him because she hadn't known yet whether she could trust him with something that was the only real security she had. He almost said something about it. He didn't. Here's what happens now, Roman said, to Knox, to the room, to the man with the gun still pointed at Selena. You call off whoever's outside this building. You walk out through whatever entrance your people came in through. And you tell the people above you that the package exists, that there are 6 hours on the clock, and that the only resolution that cancels it is one where she walks away from this with her life intact, and her testimony on record with people who can protect it. That's not a resolution, Knox said. That's a surrender. For you, Roman said. Yes. Knox looked at him for a long moment. Roman held the weapon steady and breathed through it, controlled even, the oxygen moving through his system and keeping his hands from shaking, which they wanted to, not from fear but from the specific physical intensity of a body running on adrenaline and decision. You're going to burn your own organization, Knox said, to protect her. I'm going to dismantle my own organization, Roman said. There's a difference. Burning is what happens when you have no plan. Dismantling is what happens when you decide the thing you built isn't worth what it costs anymore. He paused. Tell the people above you that the Vail financial records from 2014 to 2018 are also in the package. Every transaction, every logistics arrangement, every connection between the Vail network and yours. He held Knox's eyes. That's not leverage. That's the price of the machine my father built. I'm paying it. Something changed in Knox's face. Not fear. Men like Knox didn't process fear quickly. It had to work its way through a lot of calculation first, but something adjacent to it. The recalibration of a man whose model of the situation has just been updated with information that changes its fundamental structure. You'd go down with it, Knox said. Parts of me would, Roman said. The parts worth keeping would survive. Knox looked at Selena. She was looking at Roman, not with relief, not with gratitude, with the specific expression of someone who has just seen something they weren't certain existed and are still in the process of deciding whether to believe it. Something in her face had shifted from the controlled terror steadiness of the last 10 minutes into something that wasn't quite peace and wasn't quite its opposite, more like the moment right before a held breath finally releases. Knox said, "Lower the weapon on her." The second gunman looked at him. "Lower it," Knox repeated. The weapon came down. Roman kept his pointed at Knox. The building communications come back in approximately 12 minutes, Knox said. When your people come through that door, this gets significantly more complicated for everyone involved. He looked at Roman steadily. I need your word that when the package is delivered, when testimony is on record, the Vail financial connections are the complete record. Nothing held back for future use. You have it, Roman said. Your word means something, Knox said. It was a genuine question, cold, assessing, without particular scorn. To me it does, Roman said. Whether it means something to you depends on what kind of man you've decided I am. You've got about 11 minutes to figure that out. Knox looked at him for a long time. Then he said something short to the man he'd come in with, 2 words in a language Roman didn't recognize, and both men moved toward the door. Knox followed them. At the doorway, he stopped with his back still to the room. The people above this network aren't politicians and businessmen, Knox said quietly. They're institutional. Military contracts, federal infrastructure, intelligence adjacency. They will not go quietly. When this opens up, and it will, what comes out of it will be larger and more dangerous than what you're expecting. A pause. I want you to know that going in, Because you clearly intend to go in. I know, Roman said. Knox left. Roman kept the weapon up for another 4 seconds after the footsteps faded. Then he lowered it and let out the breath he'd been holding for approximately 3 minutes, and the physical release of it was significant. His hands finally shook, briefly, and his legs registered that they'd been braced against a hard surface and complained about it. He set the weapon on the dresser and turned. Selena was still sitting on the edge of the bed. She was looking at her hands. Monday morning, Roman said. Yes. 47 minutes. 46 and change. She looked up. I wasn't sure it would work. The contacts I had, federal level, people I'd identified from the names in the network, people who'd been building cases for years without enough to move on. I sent the compressed package to 4 of them. I didn't know if any of them would open it. I didn't know if any of them were still clean. She paused. I didn't tell you because I didn't know yet if you were. And now? He said. She held his gaze. Still working on it. He almost smiled. He didn't. His phone reconnected as the building systems came back online. A flood of messages, 12 missed calls, Moretti's voice in the voicemail clipped and urgent. He called him back. We're on 41, Roman said before Moretti could speak. Knox is leaving the building. Don't stop him. Let him go. I need his exit confirmed, and I need everyone inside accounted for. He paused. Danny Chu is somewhere in the building. Find him. Sit him somewhere quiet, and don't let him communicate with anyone. Another pause. Frank? Are you with me? I'm with you, Moretti said, the way he'd said it for 24 years since Roman was 7 years old and learning what the world actually was. Are you hurt? No. The woman? Roman looked at Selena. She was standing now, her arms loose at her sides, her face doing the controlled surface thing, but with something different underneath it. Not the compressed fear of the last hour, but something quieter and more permanent, the look of a person who has just passed through a threshold and is still registering what's on the other side. She's fine, Roman said. Then he said, she's better than fine. He hung up. He looked at her. He said, we still have to leave tonight. I know, she said. 7 hours north, the Upper Peninsula. I've never been. It's cold. I've been cold before. He nodded. He picked up the weapon from the dresser, checked it, safed it, tucked it into his jacket. He looked around the room, at the emergency lighting still throwing its thin warmth across the walls, at the window where Knox's man had stood with his weapon up, at the bed where Selena had sat and held a conversation with the man who had controlled her life for 4 years, with the steadiness of someone who had decided this was the last time she would be in a room with him and was going to make it count. The package you sent, he said. The package that canceled Knox's timeline tonight. The one that's sitting in 4 federal inboxes right now. Yes. It includes the Vail financial records. Yes, she said. I told you it did. My organization, my father's transactions. Yes. She looked at him directly. I told you what the price was when you said you wanted to dismantle it. You agreed. I know, he said. I'm not arguing. He held her gaze. I'm confirming. So we're both clear about what comes next. She looked at him, at the face of a man standing in the ruins of a decision he'd made with full information and no illusions about the cost. And something in her expression shifted again, the incremental shift that had been happening all night, each degree of it hard-won and real. We're clear, she said. The drive north began at 10:47 p.m. Roman drove. Selena sat in the passenger seat with her bag on the floor at her feet, and for the first hour neither of them spoke, which was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had been through something together and didn't need to perform the aftermath of it. Chicago fell behind them, and the highway opened up, and the sky above the Wisconsin border was clear and very dark, and full of the kind of stars that city people forget exist until they see them again. Moretti called at midnight. Knox cleared the building, he said. 2 men with him. The guards he put down are going to be fine. The one on the floor had a concussion. He's at Northwestern. He'll be out in 2 days. A pause. Danny Chu is in a room on the 8th floor. He hasn't spoken. Another pause. Roman. The federal contacts the woman reached out to. One of them called the main Vail line an hour ago. A woman named Supervisory Agent Diane Walsh organized crime division. She says she's been building a case on the Knox network for 3 years, and whatever was in the package is, she used the word comprehensive. Moretti's voice was careful. She wants to talk. Tell her we'll talk in 48 hours, Roman said. Tell her the witness is secure and the information is complete, and I will cooperate fully with the full scope of the investigation, including Vail financial records from 2014 onward. He paused. Tell her I said that specifically. She'll understand what it means. A long silence. You're really doing this, Moretti said. Quiet, not a question. Yes. Everything your father built. The part's worth keeping, Roman said. I'm keeping. The rest. He glanced at the dark highway ahead, at the long straight miles between Chicago and wherever the next version of things began. The rest was already over. I just hadn't admitted it yet. Moretti said nothing for a moment. Okay, he said finally. The same word Selina had said, the night of the photograph, when they'd settled what was going to happen. The word that meant, I don't agree with all of it, and I am choosing to continue regardless. Get some sleep, Frank, Roman said. Unlikely. A pause. Drive safe. Roman put the phone down. Outside, the Wisconsin darkness ran past at 70 miles an hour. Flat farmland giving way to the first long runs of northern forest, pine and birch pressing in toward the road. The heater in the car ran at a low, even hum. Selina had her head turned slightly toward the window, watching the dark go by. After another hour, she said, the package included one other thing. Roman waited. The 2018 logistics records, she said. The specific transport, Cincinnati. I named it. He absorbed that. My father's transaction, he said. Yes. She didn't look away from the window. I needed you to know I didn't protect it. I couldn't protect it and keep any of the rest of it honest, so I didn't. She paused. If that changes what you want to do when you talk to Walsh. It doesn't, he said. She was quiet. Selina. He said her name in the way that indicated he was about to say something that required her to actually look at him. She turned. He kept his eyes on the road. I'm not asking you to protect anything I built. I'm not asking you to manage what Walsh finds or how she uses it. The only thing I'm asking, he paused, is that when this is over and there's no more running and no more counting exits, you figure out what you actually want, not what's safe, not what's available, what you want. He paused again. And then you do that. The car moved through the dark. Selina turned back to the window. After a long time, she said quietly, I'm working on that too. The first real light of dawn found them on the Upper Peninsula Road, with the forest thick on both sides and the lake somewhere ahead, invisible but present. He could feel it in the air, pressure change, in the way the temperature dropped another 5 degrees, and the smell through the vents shifted from pine to something colder and deeper and very old. Selina had fallen asleep an hour earlier, her head against the window, one hand loose in her lap. She slept without the lights on for the first time since he'd known her. Roman drove. 70 miles from the property, his phone buzzed one last time before the signal dropped to nothing in the northern forest. A text from an unknown number. A 317 area code. 4 words. The names go wide tomorrow. Roman read it once. Put the phone face down on the console, looked at the road ahead, the straight dark line of it running into the tree line, into the morning, into whatever came next. He pressed the accelerator. Behind them, Chicago was already waking up. The elevated trains were cutting their orange scars through the morning. The building where Damian Knox had walked through a blackout and found that the woman he'd spent years trying to contain had spent 46 minutes building the specific instrument of his. The names went wide at 6:17 in the morning. Roman was parked at a gas station 40 miles south of the property when his phone caught a bar of signal and the notifications came through in a single compressed flood. 12 news alerts, 4 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize, 1 from Moretti, and a text from the federal contact number Walsh had used to reach the main Vail line, containing only a case docket number and the words, "It's open. Thank you." He sat in the car with the engine running and the heat on and read through the first three alerts. The story had broken through a wire service at 6 a.m. on the basis of financial documents, shell company records, and a witness testimony package submitted to the Organized Crime Division of the Federal Prosecutor's Office at 4:58 that morning, timed, Roman understood, to land before the morning news cycle rather than after it, where it could be managed and softened by the institutional people Knox had described. The kind of people with the capability to make things disappear. The kind of people who were significantly harder to make things disappear for when those things had already been on every major newswire for 40 minutes. The story named 7 individuals in the first release. 2 sitting elected officials, 1 federal contractor, 1 senior administrator in a state law enforcement agency, 1 retired military officer with active consulting contracts, and 2 private equity principals whose firms had been laundering network proceeds through legitimate infrastructure projects for 11 years. It named the shell companies. It named the logistics routes. It named the properties. It named Damian Knox. It named Vincent Trask. It named, in a single paragraph near the end of the 3rd section, a reference to unnamed historical financial connections between the trafficking network and a Chicago-based organized crime entity under ongoing federal review, the Veil Organization, described without specificity, but in language that told Roman exactly how Walsh intended to proceed. He read it twice. Then he put the phone in his jacket pocket and got out of the car and stood at the pump in the cold morning air and looked north at the tree line and let the temperature move through him the way it does when you've stopped trying to warm up and just let the cold be what it is. Behind him, the passenger door opened. Selena had been awake. She came around the front of the car and stood beside him, not close, just adjacent, hands in the pockets of the jacket she'd grabbed from her bag. She looked at the tree line, too. Her breath made small, even shapes in the air. "It's out," he said. "I know. My phone caught signal, too." She paused. 7 names in the first release. Yes. Knox? Named. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her process it. Not the explosion of relief he might have expected, not tears, not the visible unwinding of a long-held tension. Just a slow, full breath, and then the particular stillness of a person who has been bracing against something for so long that its removal requires a moment of recalibration before the body can understand what standing without that weight actually feels like. "The institutional names," she said, "the ones Knox warned you about. 2 of the 7. Not all of them." "No," Roman said, "not all of them. Walsh is moving in sequence. The ones with the most institutional protection go last, with the most documentation, so there's no procedural basis for suppression." He paused. "It'll take time." "How much time?" "Months. Maybe longer for some of them." He looked at her. "It won't be clean." "It's never clean," she said without bitterness. "Just fact. The kind of thing you say when you've been watching the world operate for long enough to have given up expecting it to perform the version of itself that promises clean outcomes." They stood there for another minute. A truck pulled in on the other side of the pump island, the driver moving with the brisk mechanical efficiency of someone who had been on the road since 4 a.m. and had 300 miles left. Normal morning, normal world, moving through itself without particular awareness that something had broken open 600 miles south that was going to rearrange a significant portion of what was considered settled and protected and untouchable. Roman paid for the gas. They got back in the car and drove north. The property emerged from the tree line at 8:41 a.m. A long gravel drive, birch trees on both sides with their white bark luminous in the morning light, and then the house itself, which was not the kind of thing Roman Vale was supposed to own. It was a modest structure by any standard, timber frame, wide porch, 3 bedrooms, a greenhouse addition on the east side that the previous owner had built for reasons Roman had never investigated and had maintained without fully understanding why. The lake was visible beyond the back tree line, gray-green and flat under the overcast sky, the shore maybe 200 yards through the trees. Selena got out of the car and stood in the gravel and looked at it. "It's smaller than I expected," she said. "Yes. That's not a complaint." She looked at the porch, the windows, the greenhouse glass catching what pale light the morning had available. It looks like somewhere a person could actually breathe. Roman unlocked the front door and they brought their bags inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and cold storage and pine, the smell of a place that had been closed for a season and was remembering how to be occupied. He turned the heat on, checked the water, found coffee in the back of a cabinet and made it in a percolator that belonged to a previous decade and worked exactly as it should. Selena sat at the kitchen table with her hands around the mug and looked out the window at the trees and the lake beyond them, and the morning light, thin as it was, came through the glass and touched her face, and she looked, Roman thought, like someone who had been running for so long that sitting still was a skill she was relearning from the beginning. He sat across from her. Neither of them spoke for a while, which was easy in the way that silences are easy when they've been earned rather than defaulted to. After some time, Selena said, "Walsh will want me in person." "Yes, in 48 hours, we agreed." "I'll do it. Testimony, deposition, whatever they need." She paused. "I've been carrying those names for 4 years because I had nowhere to take them. It'll be a relief to put them down somewhere that has weight." "It will also be public," Roman said. "Your name, your history, parts of it, at minimum." "I know. You've been invisible for 4 years by choice. This ends that." "I know," she said again. Not defensive, not dismissive. Just a person who has run the calculation and arrived at a conclusion and is at peace with the cost of it. Being invisible kept me safe, and it also kept me stuck. It kept the people who should be answering for things from answering for them. She looked at her hands around the mug. "I'm done being invisible for their benefit." Roman nodded. She looked up. "What about you?" "Walsh's office called this morning. We have a meeting when we're back in the city. I'll cooperate fully. Financial records, organizational structure, the logistics connections from 2014 through 2018. He paused. "Parts of the Vale organization will survive in some form. The legitimate holdings, the shipping routes, the agricultural work we've been building in the north. The rest," he set his mug down. "The rest goes into restitution. Walsh made that part of the framework." "Restitution to survivors." "Yes." She held his gaze. Something moved through her expression, something careful and searching. The look of someone verifying that what they're hearing matches something they believe can be true about a person. "That was your choice," she said. "Walsh didn't ask for that specifically." "No," he said. "It was mine." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Your father built something that touched what Knox was running. That's going to be part of the record." "Yes?" "People will use it against you." "People already use everything they can find against everyone they can find. That's not a reason to clean the record." He looked at her steadily. "My father made decisions I wouldn't have made. I made decisions he wouldn't have made. The record is what it is. I'm not interested in managing the version of it that makes me look better." Selena was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He would have hated you for this." "Yes," Roman said. "He would have." "Is that hard?" He thought about it. Actually thought rather than answering reflexively, which she seemed to notice because she waited without pressing. He thought about his father, the specific memory of him that surfaced most often, which was not the end, not the violence, but an afternoon when Roman was 9 years old and his father had taken him to the top of a building under construction on the near north side and pointed at the city below and said without sentiment, "Everything you can see belongs to someone. Make sure some of it belongs to you." He had meant it as a gift, the clearest piece of wisdom he possessed, given without reserve. He had not meant it as a lesson in what was wrong with everything he'd built. "It's complicated," Roman said. "He wasn't a simple man." "No," Selena said. "The ones who build empires never are." She stood up and took her mug to the window and looked at the lake through the trees. The overcast was breaking in the east, a thin seam of pale gold appearing at the horizon where the sky met the water. She watched it for a long time. "I want to see the lake," she said. "There's a path through the trees," he said. 200 yards, roughly." She looked at him. "Come with me." They walked through the birch trees in the cold morning air, their footsteps quiet on the frost-hardened ground, breath visible, the sound of the lake arriving before the lake itself. The low, continuous percussion of water moving against stone, patient, and enormous, and indifferent to everything that had happened in the last 2 weeks. The shore emerged from the tree line as a wide crescent of gray-brown rock running out to water that was steel blue and flat and stretched to the horizon without interruption. Selina walked to the edge of the rock and stood there. The wind off the lake was cold enough to feel it in the lungs. She stood into it with her chin slightly up, the way people stand when they want to feel something fully rather than shelter from it, and looked at the water and the sky and the long empty line where they met. Roman stood a few feet back and gave her the moment. He understood, without her having to say it, and without him having to articulate it, that this was the first time in a very long time that she had stood somewhere genuinely open and genuinely safe at the same time, and that those two things coexisting was new enough to need a moment to register in the body. After a while she said, without turning, "I don't know how to do this part." "Which part?" "The after part." She looked at the water. "I know how to survive. I've been good at surviving. I know how to stay invisible and count exits and manage what I show people and keep the useful information close and the vulnerable information buried." She paused. "I don't know how to just exist somewhere without it being in service of getting through to the next thing." "I don't know how to do it either," Roman said. She turned and looked at him. He held her gaze. "I've been building or protecting or retaliating for so long," he said, "that I'm not sure I know what I'd do with a morning that didn't require any of those things." He looked at the lake. "I'm figuring it out the same way you are. From the beginning." She turned back to the water. The seam of gold at the horizon widened as the overcast continued breaking up, the light moving across the lake's surface in slow, shifting panels, illuminating the water differently every few seconds. It was not beautiful in a comfortable way. It was beautiful in the way that cold things are beautiful, in the way that surviving something difficult is beautiful, which is to say, it was real, and it cost something to look at directly, and it was worth the cost. Selina said, "The scars." Roman was quiet. "I've been covering them since I was 19, she said. "Not for anyone else at this point, just from habit. Just because that's what you do. You cover the parts of yourself that were made by someone else's damage because looking at them is the same as looking at the moment you were most helpless, and you don't want to do that every time you look at your own hands." She turned her wrists up and looked at them, the thin white lines clearly visible in the morning light. "But I'm tired of covering them." Roman moved to stand beside her. He looked at her wrists, not quickly, not with the flinch he'd had the first night in the storm when he'd seen them by lightning flash. He looked at them the way the morning deserved, directly, without looking away. "You don't have to cover them here," he said. She looked at him. Something in her face was doing something he couldn't fully read. Not pain, not relief, but the specific expression of a person standing at the boundary between who they've been and who they might become, registering the distance between those two things and finding it, for the first time, crossable. She reached out and took his hand. Not his arm, not his sleeve, his hand, the specific hand, the right one, the one he'd used in the stairwell and the bedroom and across 9 years of an empire that was now in the process of dismantling itself into something smaller and more honest. She placed his palm over her wrists, flat, warm, covering the scars, not to hide them, but in the way you cover something to feel that another person is present with you in it. He didn't pull away. They stood there at the shore of the lake while the morning opened up around them and the light came fully through the broken clouds and found the water and the rock and the two people standing on the edge of the first morning of whatever was going to come next. The following weeks were not gentle. The federal investigation expanded in stages, the way large structural things collapse or are dismantled. Not all at once, but in the specific sequence that the people doing the work determined was most efficient and least likely to allow the pieces to become weapons before they could be secured. Walsh moved methodically. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with short, gray-threaded hair and the particular quality of someone who had been in organized crime investigation long enough to have stopped being surprised by the capacity of institutions to protect themselves, which meant she moved with a patience that read, to people who didn't know her, as slowness, but was actually the movement of someone who understood that a case built in the correct sequence was worth more than a case built quickly. She met with Roman twice in the first week at a location that was not a federal building. Her choice, not his, which told him something about the scope of the institutional names on Knox's list that were not yet public. He came with a lawyer he'd worked with for 8 years, and a hard drive, and the willingness to answer every question she put to him without the kind of strategic ambiguity that characterized the testimony of men who were cooperating while simultaneously protecting the maximum amount of their own position. Walsh noticed that quality early. "You're not hedging," she said during the first meeting, looking at him over the table with an expression that was not warm but was genuinely attentive. "No," he said. "Most people in your position hedge by reflex. Even when they're cooperating, they hedge." "I know," he said. "I've watched men do it my whole life." He paused. "It's how they make the process last longer than it needs to and preserve options they don't actually intend to use." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not interested in preserving options. I'm interested in finishing." Walsh looked at him for a moment. "The 2014 through 2018 records," she said. "The logistics connections." "Everything," he said. "That covers 3 federal jurisdictions." "I know." "Your exposure is significant." "I know that too." She held his gaze. "Why?" It was the same question Knox had asked, standing in a bedroom in the dark during a blackout. The same question in different clothing. He thought about the answer he'd given Knox, that "because men like me built yours," and understood that it was true, but incomplete. He thought about a more complete answer and found it in a simple place, in the image of a woman walking to the edge of a lake in the cold morning and turning her wrists up in the light and being tired of covering herself. "Because the thing I was protecting," Roman said, "stopped being worth the cost of protecting it." He paused. "And because there are people who need what I know more than I need to keep it safe." Walsh wrote something in the margin of her notepad. "The witness," she said. "Selena Hart." "Yes." "Her testimony is the core of 3 separate prosecution tracks. She understands that. She's aware. She'll be deposed formally next week. The process will be uncomfortable." "She's been uncomfortable before," Roman said. "She knows how to handle it." He looked at Walsh directly. "She's stronger than the process she's walking into. I want you to know that, not so you'll protect her from it, but so you'll know who you're working with." Walsh held his gaze for a moment. "I already know," she said quietly. Selena's deposition took 4 days. Roman was not present for any of it. That was her choice, and he respected it without question, understanding that there were rooms she needed to walk into alone and be the only authority on her own experience, without the complicated weight of his presence or his history, or the fact that his family's logistics had touched the transport that moved her. She walked into the federal building each morning with a lawyer Walsh's office had arranged, a woman named Sandra Leem who had spent 12 years doing witness advocacy, and she sat in a room with Walsh's team and talked for 4 days and put down everything she had been carrying since she was 16 years old in a form that had legal weight and institutional permanence and could not be managed or softened or made to disappear. Roman spent those 4 days at the Upper Peninsula property. He ran in the mornings on the shore road, long runs in the cold that burned his lungs and made his legs work until they stopped being a place where tension lived and became just mechanics again. He worked on the greenhouse, which needed the kind of physical attention that required a person to be present in their hands and their back and nowhere else. Broken panes replaced, frames re-anchored, the tomato vines that had been left to the season's end cut back and trained toward new frames he built from lumber he found in the barn. He worked until the light gave out, and then he ate and read and went to bed at a reasonable hour and slept, which was not something he'd done at a reasonable hour in years. Moretti called on the 3rd day. "Danny Chu entered a cooperation agreement this morning," he said. Roman was in the greenhouse. He set down the hammer he'd been using and looked at the row of frames in the afternoon light. "Walsh's office?" he said. "Yes." He named 2 additional institutional contacts in exchange for reduced exposure. Walsh got what she needed. A pause. He asked, through his lawyer, whether you intended to pursue separate action. "No," Roman said. "He'll hear that." "Good." Roman looked at the tomato vines, the new frames, the glass that let the pale November light through in long, quiet panels. He did what he did. Walsh deals with it. I don't have a separate interest in Danny Chu anymore. Moretti was quiet for a moment. That's growth, he said, dry as wood. Don't push it, Frank. A sound that might have been a laugh, brief and genuine. The Meridian Club property, Moretti said. The title cleared. The legal team is ready to transfer it to the Survivor Restitution Fund when you give the word. Give the word, Roman said. Done. A pause, the last one. Roman. The organization, what's left of it after Walsh finishes. The shipping routes, the agricultural projects, the rehabilitation housing. I want you to know that I'm still here for that work, whatever it becomes. Roman stood in the greenhouse for a moment, the cold glass behind him, the afternoon light going golden and low. I know, Frank, he said. I'm counting on it. Selena came back on the evening of the fourth day. He heard the car on the gravel drive and went to the porch, and she came up the steps with her bag over her shoulder and her face carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who has been intensely present in a room for 4 days and has nothing left to perform, no more composure to maintain, no more controlled surface to hold in place. She looked at him, and he could see how tired she was. Deeply, structurally tired, the kind that required time rather than sleep. He said, "How are you?" "Done," she said. It covered a lot of ground. "I'm done." "Come inside." She came inside and sat on the couch near the wood stove that he'd had going for the last hour, and she sat there with her boots still on and her head back and her eyes closed, and he brought her tea and sat in the chair across from her. And they stayed like that for a long time without speaking, while the fire moved in the stove and the lake made its constant sound outside in the dark. After a while, she said, with her eyes still closed, "Walsh said the first 3 prosecution tracks will be open before the end of the year. Knox is in custody in Cincinnati. They picked him up yesterday morning. The 2 institutional names from the first release entered their own attorneys into the process this morning, which Walsh says means they're looking at cooperation as their least bad option." She paused. She said the system is slow, and she said it without apology, which I respected. She said not all of it would end in the way it should, and she said that without apology too. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. I believed her on both counts. "Yes," Roman said. "The 2018 transport." She looked at him then, directly. "Walsh has it in the record. Your father's logistics company is named. It's going to be public." "I know. Are you ready for that?" He thought about the answer honestly. He thought about the version of himself that had stood at a 43rd floor window a month ago and watched the city that his father had claimed and thought about empire and leverage and the calculation of other people's usefulness. He thought about what that man had been ready for and what he was ready for now, and found that the distance between them was real, but that the journey between them had not been clean, and he didn't intend to describe it as such. "I'm ready to let it be true," he said. "Ready is probably too strong." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "That's honest." "I'm working on that." The ghost of the not-quite smile moved through her face, the same one he'd seen in the apartment weeks ago, the reflex that she'd nearly trained out of herself. This time it lasted a half-second longer before it faded. "Roman," she said. "Yeah." "I don't know what this is." She said it plainly, without embarrassment, and without the kind of careful qualification that would have softened it. "Between you and me, I don't know what it is or what it's supposed to become. I know what it's been. It's been surviving the same thing from different sides." She looked at him. "I don't know if that's a foundation or just a shared scar." He held her gaze. "I don't know either," he said. "That doesn't bother you?" "It would have a month ago," he said. "I used to need to know the structure of things before I was willing to be in them. Blueprint first, then building." He paused. "I'm trying to learn how to be in something while it's still figuring out what it is." She looked at him for a long time. The fire moved in the stove. Outside, the lake went on being the lake, cold and permanent and older than everything they were carrying. "Okay," she said. "Then that's where we start." The winter came in full 3 weeks later, dropping the temperature into ranges that made the lake groan in the early mornings and layered ice along the shore in formations that were beautiful and entirely indifferent to beauty. Roman ran shorter distances and worked the greenhouse more, and drove into the nearest town twice a week for supplies, and discovered, in the particular way that people discover things about themselves when the structure they've built their identity inside has been removed, that he was capable of being significantly quieter than he'd known. Selina stayed. She stayed in the way that someone stays when they're choosing it daily, rather than defaulting to it. With intention, with awareness, with the occasional morning where she stood in the kitchen and he could see her doing the particular math of a person who is monitoring their own instincts to make sure they're operating from choice and not from inertia. He didn't ask about those mornings. He understood them. He had his own version. She called Sandra Leem twice a week, and they talked through the deposition follow-up and the prosecution timeline and the way the story was developing in public, which it was, slowly, in stages, the names appearing in news coverage, and the institutional responses and the counter-narratives and the specific ugliness of public accountability when it involves people who have spent decades constructing a version of themselves that the process is now systematically taking apart. She found a therapist in the nearest city, a woman named Dr. Okafor, and drove there on Tuesday afternoons. She didn't talk about those sessions with Roman, and he didn't ask. He understood that there were rooms inside a person that needed to be worked through without an audience, even an audience of one, even one who'd seen the scars. He found his own, eventually. A man named Dr. Parrish who worked with individuals navigating what he described in an intake form as significant life transition, which was, Roman thought, the most useful possible understatement for what was happening. He sat in the man's office once a week in the city during the days he was there for Walsh's process, and talked about his father and about empire, and about the specific difficulty of being the person who dismantles a thing they also loved. Dr. Parrish said during the fourth session, "You keep describing it as a debt." "It is a debt," Roman said. "To whom?" Roman thought about it. "Everyone it cost," he said, "including me." Parrish wrote something. "Debts eventually get paid or they get written off. Which one are you working toward?" Roman sat with that for a moment. "I don't know yet," he said. "I'm still in the middle of paying." "That's honest," Parrish said. "I'm working on that," Roman said, and heard his own voice and thought of Selina in the firelight, and almost smiled. In February, the first major prosecution opened. The name was a sitting state senator, and the coverage was significant. Front page, sustained, the kind of public reckoning that had a specific weight, because the person in question had spent a career describing himself as a particular kind of man, and the evidence described someone entirely different. Walsh called Roman when it opened to tell him the deposition record had been central to the case architecture. "You did this," she said. "We did it," he said. "Mostly she did it." "I know," Walsh said. "I meant you collectively." He told Selina that evening. She was at the kitchen table with her coffee and the morning's light through the window, and when he told her, she was quiet for a moment and then nodded once, small and precise. "Good," she said. Just that. One word, carrying everything. In March, Knox's federal indictment was filed and covered 11 charges across 4 jurisdictions. 2 of the institutional names entered cooperation agreements in the same week. The network that had moved Selina from Indianapolis to Cincinnati in 2018 and operated for 11 years through private clubs and shell companies and charity foundations was, by the end of March, a matter of public record, a federal prosecution file, and a set of accounts whose remaining contents were being directed towards survivor services by order of a federal judge. On the evening the Knox indictment was filed, Roman stood in the greenhouse in the last light while the temperature outside dropped into single digits, and looked at the rows of tomato vines climbing their new frames, and the basil and the lemon trees in their containers, and thought about his father on the roof of an unfinished building, pointing at the city and saying, "Everything you can see belongs to someone." He thought about what belonging meant, what it cost, what it produced. He thought about what he was growing in a greenhouse in the Upper Peninsula, while the empire dismantled itself in federal courtrooms 600 miles south, and found that he didn't have a clean thought about it, that it was tangled and complicated and still cost something to look at directly, and found also that he could look at it directly, which was not nothing. Selina appeared at the greenhouse door. She was wearing a heavy sweater and her hair was loose, and she had 2 cups of something hot, and she came inside and closed the door behind her against the cold and stood among the vines and the lemon trees and looked at him with the expression that had been developing on her face over the course of the winter. Not the controlled surface, not the managed neutrality, but something quieter and more genuinely hers, the expression of a person who is slowly becoming comfortable with being seen. She handed him one of the cups. He took it. "The indictment's filed," she said. "Yes." She looked at the vines for a moment, at the new growth coming in, tentative and green against the wooden frames. "It doesn't feel the way I thought it would." "How does it feel?" "Quieter," she said. "I thought it would feel like something finished, like a door closing." She looked at him. "It just feels like a morning." "Yes," he said. "Is that enough?" He looked at her. At the face that had been through everything he knew, it had been through, and was standing in a greenhouse in February, holding a warm cup and asking a real question. "I think that's what enough actually feels like," he said. "Not a door, just a morning you can stand in without something chasing you through it." She held his gaze. Outside, the lake moved under its winter ice with the low sound it made all season, the deep structural sound of something enormous moving slowly, adjusting its weight, persisting. The cold pressed at the glass. The lemon tree in the corner had 2 small fruits on it, improbable and yellow against the gray light, growing in a climate that was not designed for them, which was its own kind of statement about what survives when it's tended to. Selena reached for his hand. He let her take it. They stood there in the greenhouse while the winter moved outside, and the light came through the glass in the particular way it does in February in the north, thin and honest and without any warmth to spare. And neither of them said anything else, because there was nothing left that needed to be said, only the ongoing work of being present in a morning that neither of them had been certain, at various points in the last year, they would live to stand in. The tomato vines climbed their frames. The lake persisted under the ice. And outside the glass, the world continued its enormous indifferent turning, and inside it, 2 people who had survived the worst of what it could produce stood in the quiet and held on.